Will Trump's lust for Greenland break the world?
The president went and insulted the leaders, including the leaders of Switzerland.
The Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, called it a rupture.
I feel like we are in serious Mad King terrain here.
Nobody has any capacity to rein him in.
The president could make a case for Greenland and why the U.S. has to have more strategic control, but he just chose the most bullying way to do it.
What is the U.S. relationship to Europe going to be like if Europe is kind of done playing nice?
They can't be done playing nice. They have Ukraine and they have the tariffs to deal with.
Emily, do you think it matters that Trump kept calling Greenland Iceland?
I mean, it doesn't seem great.
Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. January 22nd, 2026, the Greenland War Averted edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast here in Washington, D.C. From the New York Times Magazine and Yale University Law School, Emily Bazelon in New Haven. Hello, Emily.
Hey, David. Hey, John.
And from New York City, where he was just named president of CBS, the Chuck Berry Society, John Dickerson. Hello, John.
Hello, David. That was like even more of a dad joke than even I could conjure.
I feel like we're gonna have these for a while, and I'm starting to look forward to them. It's excellent.
Oh, really? My girlfriend told me to stop it, to leave John alone.
No, I think. Well, I don't know how John feels about it.
John's very loose.
It prevents us all from taking ourselves too seriously, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I'm cocooned in banks of snow around me, so I feel
you're untouchable. Or maybe frozen. Incapable of any response, emotional or otherwise. This week on the Gabfest, will Trump's lust for Greenland break the world? Has it already broken the world, in fact? Then the Supreme Court is poised, seemingly, to protect the independence of the Federal Reserve, at least a little teeny bit. And then Emily has an incredible new article in the New York Times Magazine, a tour de force, a history of the FBI under Kash Patel, a history of the FBI in 2025. Plus, we will have cocktail chatter and a reminder. We have a live show coming up, and we have a great guest to announce. So we're going to be in D.C. on Wednesday, February 11th, just 3 or so weeks away. And our guest is going to be Congressman Jamie Raskin. Jamie is just so smart and so interesting and so clever, and he knows everything. And I can't wait. I can't believe he's never been on the Gabfest before, honestly. But I cannot wait to hear what he's got to say about the world. But that is going to be on February 11th, and you can get tickets at slate.com/GabfestLiveDC. And then we're going to be at 6th and I here in Washington, D.C., where we did our first live show back in 2009. So it's great to be back there. We love being at 6th and I. Slate.com/GabfestLiveDC. Are you guys fired up for Jamie Raskin?
Absolutely. Fired up for the show. The whole shebang.
I'm a fibrillating mess of excitement.
Wow.
That'll really draw the crowds.
Fibrillation is very anxiety producing.
Oh, no. Can't you be fibrillating with excitement?
I've been watching The Pit, and I feel like there's something with fibrillating.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, in the medical context, it feels like, yeah, you're trying to defibrillate. You're trying to defibrillate, but here it's all positive fibrillation.
So when I was in my early and mid 20s, my then girlfriend / future ex-wife lived in a group house, and that group house included a bunch of Norwegians who were grad students. And one summer, a friend of theirs, also a Norwegian grad student, but from Norway, came to crash on their couch for the summer. I think his name was Stein. All he wanted to do was drink beer. So any conversation with Stein would be like, end with, and should we drink some beers? And it turned out that Stein had just finished his dissertation, and his dissertation was, he would tell us very solemnly, it was about the U.S. relationship with Greenland in the interwar period. And for decades, literally until this month, it was a family joke about the most ridiculous possible thing you could study was U.S. relations with Greenland in the interwar period. And it turns out it was prescient. We're still in the interwar period, at least for the moment. Will it last? So Stein, if you're out there, congratulations on being a prophet. So President Trump in Davos said he would not use force to take Greenland, but recommitted to demanding the territory from Denmark. threatened escalating tariffs to get it. Now he has said there is a framework where we're going to negotiate with Denmark, NATO, who knows what, and that Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance would handle those negotiations, and the tariffs are off. So, John, however, this did seem like a breaking point in the world order and in the Atlantic order, and the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, called it a rupture. Is this the end of the most effective transoceanic alliance in the history of Earth?
Well, it may not be the end because future presidents might return to all of the things that undergirded it in the first place. But it's one more sign that the administration has no interest in doing things the European way, and almost seems excited to.
Yeah, I'm just going to dispute like that word European way. I mean, it's not the European way. They have no interest in doing things the way the international way. It's not
Sure.
like it's like, oh yes, it's where it's like we have to wear berets or something.
I will sure.
Yeah.
The NATO way, the global Northern Alliance.
No, when you say it the European way, it makes it seem like effete and French, and there will be a butter sauce on it or something. But no, you don't. That's not what you. Sorry.
Will not be working with Europe in the way that the U.S. has in the past. And in fact, it was an antagonistic. The president went and insulted the leaders, including the leaders of Switzerland, which was hosting Davos. The Commerce Secretary Lutnick seemed gleeful in poking at the Europeans. This has been going on since 2016. What it feels like to me is that there is a way in which Europeans have thought, okay, we're trying to figure out the way to deal with Trump. And, we'll push back. That worked for a little while, or that was an attempt for a little while. Then it was, we're going to try and mollify him and do what he wants and flatter him and do all that. And none of these things are working. So I think there was, in the response, I think some of the response was, this is sort of, nothing works, and therefore we really have to come up with our own way of responding to this. But my biggest reaction is what a waste of time. Like, the president could make a case for Greenland and why the U.S. has to have more strategic control. There's a perfectly fine case to be made, but he just chose the most bullying way to do it.
Yeah, I feel like we are in serious Mad King terrain here. The demand is right. Okay, so sure, maybe there is more strategic value to Greenland than we've been paying attention to, and we should have more bases there and more investment. But the Danes, the Greenlanders, they're like happy to do that. They are not standing in our way. This is like a made up problem. And then the way he went about it is just, I mean, bullying is one way to think about it, and another is just like kind of delusional. These like posting, signal messages from Emmanuel Macron and other European leaders, writing back in this way that just makes him seem incredibly mercurial and whimsical, right? One way to think about this.
But delusional is delusional is an interesting word, but it's not delusional because he actually has shapes reality. That's what's so terrifying about it, is that because he is uniquely the president of the United States, he does shape reality, even though the reality is that of as you say, a mad king.
Right. So maybe delusional is the wrong word. But just to finish my thought, I was reading Trump's text message to Mark Rutte, and there's this premise that it's all because he feels spurned by the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. And then, of course, at least me, I have this instinct of well, maybe they should have just given him the Nobel and we would. But no, that is the wrong path to go down, because if it's not this, it's going to be something else. This person cannot be placated. He cannot be placated. And so to me, that's why Mark Carney's speech about rupture resonated, because it just feels like if you're the Europeans, the Canadians, the Australians, the whoever else's, you've got to be reaching the conclusion that as much as you would like to think that America is going to wake up from this fever dream, they're stuck with this guy for at least 3 more years. And you got to start really adjusting and changing how you think about the world order and the place of the United States in it. And sure, in the short term, we can wring more wealth and concessions from these other countries. Assume, in this world of Trump where there's a pie, it doesn't grow, it's all zero sum. okay, fine. But in the longer term, this like strategy of non-diplomacy based on extraction and exploitation, it's going to make everyone worse off.
It's almost the clearest sign to me that we're living now not in a nation that's functioning sort of as a constitutional democracy, but in a monarchy or an authoritarian nation, which is that there's an absolute role for the legislature, the Senate especially, to reject what Trump has been doing and to rein in this president who's nobody. There is literally probably nobody in the country except Trump's courtiers who thinks that threatening to take Greenland is a wise use of time, energy, resources, the military, the planning capacity of the military. They all know it's the crazy whim of a petulant, power-hungry person, and yet nobody has any capacity to rein him in, which suggests to me there is not. This is if the most lunatic thing a president wants to do is indulged by the country and is indulged by the legislature, which is supposed to prevent him from doing this, then you're not in a country that's governed by a legislature. You're in a monarchy, because that's what literally a legislature is job is to stop things like this.
I think what we're circling around here is what the Europeans may have concluded from this is that the madman theory is actually broken. So the madman theory put forward during the Nixon administration is, well, wait a minute, we better deal with him because if he's a madman, he might, cook off these nuclear weapons and, oh my gosh, we'll all get blown up. But the second part of the madman theory is that if you're worried that he's a madman, but if you placate him, it will stick. Because if it doesn't stick, then he's just mad. And then you have to contain him. But the theory is that as a negotiating posture, the other party, in this case Europe, has to believe that if they give in, if they flatter, if they do all these things, it will stop the madness from happening. Because otherwise, there's no difference between a constant stream of madness where you give things up or a constant stream of madness where you do nothing. And what breaks is when you decide it's a constant stream of madness, then you start making alliances with China. You do start doing what you were suggesting, Emily, which is making irrevocable decisions about how working with the United States is lost. And to your point, David, there are ways to excuse some of the president's behaviors, but in the past, his allies have found ways to do that, and they're doing it now. But what this shows, the discussion about the Nobel Peace Prize and the president's text saying that he's not going to pursue peace now that he wasn't given the Nobel Prize, and also the way he talked about the president of the Swiss Federation. He went on this rambling explanation about how when he raised tariffs on Switzerland, the president of the Swiss Federation, who I think he said called the prime minister, called him to complain, and he didn't like this woman. He said, frankly, she rubbed me the wrong way. When the distance shrinks between the personal whims of the president and national policy, that's when things get dangerous. And there was more evidence in this dispute of how basically it's the whims of Donald Trump that are governing things. And that makes everything more unpredictable.
I also like that he told the Swiss that without the U.S., they'd all be speaking German, which of course is the language most spoken in Switzerland. But so I mean, this is a point that I can't even remember where it was made, but I read the other week, is that one of the things that Trump relies on is they actually rely on all the benefits of alliance. They think they can keep all the benefits of alliance without being constrained by any of the costs of alliance. They think they can get all the economic services and goods, the market for labor, for the market for goods, the tax havens for U.S. companies, the kind of general culture of Europe, the consumption of American products by Europe, but that they don't have to play by any rules that make Europe or any allies happy. And, for the moment that works, as you were indicating, Emily, like for a moment the U.S. is so big and so powerful that we can bully, we can intimidate. But in the long run, or even in the medium run, what you end up with is a Europe that's closely tied to China economically, or more closely tied to China, that is in the thrall of Russia militarily, and a world where the United States' power is weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. And the failure to recognize that bullying allies is a short-term win but a long-term loss is, I suspect, going to be one of the most ultimately damaging things about the Trump administration. Like, ultimately, the breaking, the breaking of lots of institutions within the United States is a huge problem, but the breaking of a system, a system of alliance, and a system of connection, a system of rules about behavior for the world is going to be even more devastating.
It'll be in the medium to long term, and Trump thinks that either he won't be president or he doesn't care, or he'll just be able to blame someone else for it. That just feels like the play over and over again, and it keeps kind of working for him, right? I mean, there was a new poll in the New York Times this morning that 49% of the country 49% of voters think the country is worse off now than a year ago. And was more than the people who either think it's the same or better off, a lot more. But it's still not like an overwhelming majority of Americans. And he still had in this poll 73% of Republicans thinking the country was better off.
Only 73% of Republicans?
Yeah, so that seems okay. I'm glad
that's
you're
actually quite low.
That in a different way than me.
Well, yeah, because also relative numbers like that are difficult. Because if you thought things were awful, I mean, his promise was that he would make things better. So status quo is not good for him. I was looking at the CBS poll, and I think the way this Greenland issue fits into domestic politics is, first of all, as Harry Enton pointed out on CNN, the taking over Greenland by force or otherwise polls even worse than Donald Trump polls on the Jeffrey Epstein matter, which is to say that he's 39 points underwater when it comes to how he's handled the Epstein matter. He's 40 points underwater on this question of Greenland. Now, that's statistically insignificant, but the point is, it's not something that the American people are on for. And the reason that matters relative to what you were saying, Emily, is what do people care about? They care about prices. CBS poll says that 74% of Americans believe that the Trump administration has not focused on lowering prices. 76% say their income hasn't kept up with inflation. On the issues of immigration, the economy, and inflation, the disapproval numbers for Trump are either in the high 50s or in the mid 60s. So he's doing terribly on the issues that Americans care about. And when he fixates in this hyper strange way on Greenland, it not only is something people don't want him to do, but it's something people don't want him to do relative to the things they do want him to do that he isn't doing. And so as a domestic matter, this is one more piece of evidence that he's not focused on what people want him to be focused about, and seems almost constitutionally incapable of being focused on what they want him to be focused on.
Just to wrap this topic up, I'm curious what you guys think the world's relationship to Trump will be in the next several years. I think up until this moment, there was this way, and I guess I don't mean the world, I mean Europe, let's say. There was this way in which Europe has been very indulgent of Trump and very sycophantic and very much like, let's not placate him, or let's placate him because he responds well to flattery. And now there's this kind of sense like, well, this whole Greenland nonsense, this is a pointless exercise for the reasons John just outlined a minute ago. So will Trump just deal with Europe less? Because Trump needs attention, and he needs to be at the center of attention. He needs activity around him. He needs to be flattered. He needs to be sucked up to. Will he just turn to other places where he's more likely to get that attention than Europe? I mean, what is the U.S. relationship to Europe going to be like if Europe is kind of done playing nice? Or maybe Europe isn't done playing nice. Maybe Europe is going to be like, they're going to play nice.
They can't be done playing nice. They have Ukraine and they have the tariffs to deal with.
Plus, the U.S. is in a gargantuan market that the Europeans need. I mean, the EU trade deal was one that it's very easy to argue Trump got the better of, at least in its previous form before it all collapsed. I don't know what the state of it is today, because the deal collapsed when he was bouncing around about Greenland. I think that his attention on Europe and these fights will happen until after he's out of the presidency, because, as you pointed out, David, this is a nourishing, to be hated by Europe is like a wonderfully It's a nice
Mother's
trip to
milk.
the sauna. Yeah, exactly. I mean, he loves it, and Europe loves having these shocked reactions, and we all love covering it. That isn't to minimize the real stakes of what's happening, but just looking at it from the perspective you suggested, David, I think he continues to get into these fights with Europe. And as much as Europe and those who believe in alliances are furious and may take efforts to find new routes to China and other places, they still have to deal with Russia. And you can't deal with Russia, and NATO can't deal with Russia without the United States, which is what's so interesting about Greenland. There's a strategic reason that Greenland is really important, and you could argue, the United States to have more strategic control over Greenland. You don't want to have to work through the committees the way you do now. The Arctic Panama Canal, the Northwest Passage, is a real strategic vulnerability for the United States as the Russians seek to maximize that as a way to just cause general mischief. Like, there's a real case you could have made if you were seeking to make the case, which the president didn't. But so those interests all still exist. So I think this is going to be, a constant from now and the foreseeable future, this tension.
Emily, do you think it matters that Trump kept calling Greenland Iceland?
I mean, it doesn't seem great. It's not a great sign.
And did you guys probably know this because you know these kinds of things, but what I didn't realize is that the reason that Greenland is called Greenland is that Eric the Red, who was in fact Norwegian, which means the president, in complaining to the prime minister about the Nobel Peace Prize, was like 1,000 years too late. But anyway, the Norse explorer Eric the Red called it Greenland because it was basically trying to trick people in coming to Greenland by making it seem not like a big block of ice, which it is. Whereas Iceland is more temperate.
But Greenland had this sort of period when it was quite habitable for the Vikings. I mean, it was habitable for the native populations for a very, very long time. But there was a period where they were able to farm effectively in Greenland. It was a slightly warm period, I think around 1000 AD. And so it was a more tolerable climate if you were a Viking coming from the relatively warm area of Norway.
Well, Eric the Red was exiled there because he murdered a bunch of people. So for him, it was a forced march.
That's it for Greenland today. Greenland History Minute.
That was good. I learned some things.
Oh, yeah. No, you can really go down a Greenland rabbit hole.
The Supreme Court heard argument on Wednesday about whether President Trump could remove Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook for cause without any process and without any way for Cook to seek reinstatement. We have finally found the bridge too far for the unitary executive zealots. The bridge too far is for the president to be able to simply remove a Fed governor on a whim. So, Emily Bazelon, what is the background of the Cook case? What was the president seeking? Why were the justices skeptical?
Lisa Cook is a member of the board of Federal Reserves. The president tried to fire her for cause a few months ago. The cause is a set of allegations that she committed mortgage fraud based on a second property she has. Those allegations she's not been charged with the crime. They've never been tested in court in any way, shape, or form. And so the argument here is a real extreme of executive power. It is that if the president says that you have done something wrong as a member of the board of the Fed, he can fire you, and the courts can't review it. And once he makes that determination, it qualifies, it meets the legal standard of being for cause. The Supreme Court is not going to go for this. They made that clear. It's possible it could be maybe 8-1 and a kind of short opinion that just says no. And that will actually only be a preliminary ruling because this case right now is coming from the emergency docket, which would mean that this would be the Supreme Court saying, let's send this back to the lower courts for more discussion about what for cause really means and what process Lisa Cook is entitled to, et cetera. It'll be meaningful because then Cook will remain on the board for the next couple of years while the litigation plays out. So, in a lot of ways, I think the argument was pretty reassuring in terms of the sense of the likely outcome and the skepticism of the justice. I have to say, it was incredible to me to listen to the Solicitor General of the United States argue that Trump's Truth Social post criticizing Lisa Cook was all the notice she was entitled to. And the set of arguments that came from that, I mean, there was literally like headlines that were saying like, is a Truth Social post due process? Even if, and even though I think these arguments are losers, just hearing them, articulated with like, it seemed like real conviction by John Sauer, the Solicitor General, was really unsettling.
Emily, as you looked at the questioning from the conservative justices, one thing I was struck by, but I think maybe just because of my ignorance, was the way in which Justice Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett were kind of wrestling with, like, and even Alito were wrestling with the real world effects of what this view from the Solicitor General would mean if it played out in a way that they don't or haven't in previous decisions, where they've kind of ruled as if Donald Trump weren't the president, or if, and do I have that wrong? Or did that strike you, or am I just confused in my constant state of confusion?
No, I think that's a really astute point, and I'm so glad you brought it up. It was really front and center, this very pragmatic set of questions. Kavanaugh, Barrett, Roberts, well, okay, Kavanaugh said the statute sets up the Fed to be independent. That's why we have this for-cause standard, which is a higher standard than in some other federal agencies. And so Kavanaugh kept saying, like, well, this is going to shatter the Fed's independence. What do you think about that? Barrett at one point brought up like the effect on the stock markets and the economy over time. These are pressing concerns in this context. The Supreme Court conservatives seem really taken with the effect on the world economy and the financial markets and the Fed's independence. And I think they would argue that it is in line with originalism because they see this set of concerns as being something that Congress was thinking about and cared about when they wrote the statute. But you're also right that often we don't hear them talking about this. And, the pure version of originalism is you're not supposed to think about consequences and impact and effect of a decision at all. You're just supposed to like look at the words on the page, give them the meaning that was given to them when they were written, and that's it. And it is absolutely true that the justices bounce around in whether they're consistent about that approach or not.
So, Emily, can we dig into John's favorite case from 1935, Humphrey's Executor? So it is pretty clear that this Supreme Court is, even as it will protect Lisa Cook, it is going to overturn this precedent of 90 years, which protected the independence of what we thought of as independent agencies, the commissioners and agents who served on things like the FCC or the FTC, which have traditionally been thought of as positions that you're appointed to by a president, but then you serve unless you commit some kind of malfeasance, you get to serve in it. And there's a mix of Democrats and Republicans who serve on that. And this Supreme Court has basically said, no. This diminishes, demeans, impedes on the power of the executive in a grotesque way. The executive has to be able to make all these decisions, and to be deterred and delayed by these commissioners is wrong, and it slows government down, makes government ineffective. And so we have to get this out of the place, out of here. Why is the Supreme Court not amenable to that argument around the Federal Reserve? It would seem like this is a setting economic policy, clearly important executive decision. The executive is shaping where the economy should go. Why do the conservatives on the court want to create this carve out, which is, oh no, the Fed, because they're worried for the reasons you guys were just talking about. They're worried about the real world consequences to the market if that goes away. But how intellectually are they reaching the conclusion that somehow the Fed exists in one world, but all these other independent agencies and commissions exist in another.
Yeah, we don't know the answer, really. There is one line in a previous ruling about the Fed that froze Lisa Cook in place temporarily, in which the court talked about it being quasi-private and used some other term, which we should look up, and then I'll just read the whole line. But really, the court has not explained this distinction, and maybe they'll come up with some historical analysis that will be persuasive in this opinion. I think in the end, it probably won't be persuasive. And what really is going to be different here is just they think the independence of the Fed is important, and so they're going to treat it differently.
Emily, could they be saying that basically they don't like when the executive rewrites a law passed by Congress, and in this case, that the definition of cause, which is essentially whatever the president decides it should be, is so absurd that it amounts to a rewriting of a law passed by Congress, and that's why they might not like the view the administration's holding?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little more complicated than that, because in the example of the FTC commissioner and other people who Trump has fired, he has tried to do it without cause, right? He said basically, like, I can just can this person. I don't need to show any cause. And so in a sense, he took the direction from the court to say, okay, well, with the Fed board, I do need to show cause. So it's like there are these two different legal questions operating here.
But I thought that's because the Fed has the specific for cause language. That language also exists for the FTC.
The language, there is also the standard of incompetence, negligence, and malfeasance for the FTC and the other agencies, right? So it's like there's two levels of reasoning the president could give. And if he was being consistent, he would say, I'm firing all these people for cause. But he's only tried to do that with Cook. And so, yeah.
But Emily, with the things like the FTC and Humphrey's executor, is the Supreme Court likely to say it is unconstitutional for Congress to take this power from the president? Or are they going to say the statutes just simply give the president broad latitude to fire whoever he wants? I mean, is it so? I would think if they say that it's unconstitutional, like the president like inherently has these powers, then I would have think that the president would inherently sort of, that would also apply to the Fed, like that when Congress made the Fed independent, it was unconstitutional. They couldn't make the Fed independent because that would impede the executive. So that's, I guess, what I'm trying to wonder if the court is going to find sort of some constitutional Article 3 reason to get rid of Humphrey's executor, or is it like has to do with legislation instead?
Yeah, Article 2. I mean, so
Article
it
2,
is.
excuse me.
That's okay. I think that it is likely that in the context of Humphrey's executor and the FTC and the SEC and all the other alphabet soup, that yes, they are going to say that the way Congress set up these agencies takes too much power from the president based on his Article 2 authority. And that's why he can just fire people willy-nilly without cause in that context. And then there is going to be a kind of likely carve out for the Fed, which may be intellectually completely unconvincing for the reasons you just suggested, that actually, if you think it's unconstitutional to have these semi-independent other agencies, well, that should also apply to the Fed. But you know what? Like, they can just decide that the Fed is different. What they said about the Fed in their last opinion was that it is uniquely structured quasi-private entity that follows the distinct history tradition of the first and second banks of the United States. And then a bunch of legal scholars like quickly shredded that and said basically like, no, it doesn't. It's sort of though in nobody's interest. I mean, really, like there was an almost universal rejection of that idea, and there's a lot of scholarship on it. So it's not going to be that easy to just sort of paper over it. On the other hand, except for the Trump administration, like except for Donald Trump, it's kind of in everyone's interest to just go for this, even if it doesn't really add up. And so it'll be kind of interesting to see whether the dissenters really call out the majority about this inconsistency or whether everyone kind of looks the other way.
I feel like also in the mood music is a few other things here, which is that to remember that the president is essentially trying to control the Fed by other means. So on the one hand, Powell is being investigated for overruns in a flimsy, if not completely pretextual case about overruns and costs in the Fed renovation. This attack on Cook is an effort to influence interest rate policy. This is a part of two efforts by the president or his allies to not just like mess with these constitutional questions relative to the formation of the Fed, but like go completely outside of the normal way of doing things in a presidency. I mean, to talk about Article 2 powers is important for the purposes of the Supreme Court, but like outside of it, you know, we're talking about Queensberry rules in the boxing ring, and the president is like beating somebody over the head with a folding chair.
I'm really glad that you're bringing that up, because I do have a concern that the way all of this is going to kind of play out. So these decisions like probably will come out in June. And so it'll seem like, okay, well, the Trump administration won one and they lost one. And the Supreme Court gets to seem kind of reasonable. And plus, like, there's birthright citizenship coming up too. And that is another completely outlandish, extreme, crazy argument that we shouldn't even be having. And so I just get a little worried that it will seem as if there's this kind of middle path because the Trump administration doesn't win each of these challenges. But that's why it's so important to do what you're doing, which is to remind ourselves that some of these things are like, they just shouldn't even be. They shouldn't be part of what we're talking about.
And what Greenland, the Greenland conversation highlighted is that we are on an ever escalating path of personal whim of the president affecting just the entire statecraft, both domestically and internationally. So that's happening at the same time as well.
Yeah. And it's kind of numbing, right? And then you have these like extreme conversations and they kind of, at least with me, like raise my heart rate. And then it just is distorting to the whole discussion, to our reality.
Can we end on a really minor point, which is that one of the reasons why Cook was I think a district court judge originally stayed this decision and prevented Cook's removal was that an argument that she could not be investigated for something that happened before she took on the role, that the supposed mortgage fraud was before she was nominated for the Federal Reserve, and therefore it was properly or could have been properly considered by the people who approved her nomination. Therefore, how could it possibly be some sort of misdeed? And this is a very similar argument, actually, into one that Trump has made over the years, which is that any sort of wrongdoing that happened in the past has been effectively litigated and wiped off the slate by an election. The election clears the decks of anything that happened before the election because the voters chose in this case, or the senators approved Cook, even though they could have looked at this mortgage and they didn't. It's no longer relevant. That seems to me a really poor argument. And if I were Lisa Cook's lawyers, I would be making that argument. But as a citizen, I do not buy that argument. I do not think that just because something has been considered by one body or potentially could have been considered by one body, therefore it is no longer grounds for anyone to care about or investigate or look at. So
yeah, I don't think that argument is going to fly in the end, right? It doesn't really make sense. Like, imagine that someone in reality found out that Lisa Cook or any member of the board on the Fed had, like, committed embezzlement, and the reason that this wasn't taken into account when they were appointed was that nobody knew about it. Obviously, that would be relevant. Like, if they got indicted for a crime, it just seems like that is not the question in time is not the right one. And Paul Clement, who's the lawyer who was arguing on Cook's behalf, he gave lots of other reasons for the Supreme Court to rule. He didn't disavow this one, but he was trying to give them lots of other doors to walk through. I also have to say, footnote, it was super interesting that he was the lawyer for Lisa Cook. I mean, this is the former Solicitor General, right? This is like normie conservative, incredibly elite, successful, normie conservative Paul Clement, who was the Solicitor General for George W. Bush. And here he is trying to basically and succeeding in being extremely skilled oral advocate, but also like the reasonable guy. And I think he is there to reassure the conservatives on the court, like, you don't have to go for this. Here is this normie legal path for you right here. Let me lay it out with 10 options.
I kept getting confused in the reading because I was like, wait, isn't he the Solicitor General? Like, it was very, very confusing. I thought it was interesting on the point you raised, David, about past practices being so disqualifying, you have to take them into account. That was raised, at least, if not by others, but by Alito, which, given that Alito is a conservative and his wife is a big fan of the president's, when Alito put that example forward. He said, well, what if there was, suggestion, I think he mentioned Hitler and the Klan, the idea that there was information that could come out that would be so immediately objectionable that it would disqualify someone. It immediately made me think of the Access Hollywood tape, in which, as you say, David, well, it's not disqualifying because the voters didn't take it into account.
Emily and her colleague Rachel Poser at the New York Times Magazine have created an astonishing oral history of Kash Patel's FBI, a year inside Kash Patel's FBI. A few months ago, Emily, and maybe was it Rachel also?
Mm-hmm. Amazing partner.
Did a deep dive into a real-time history of the Department of Justice and how it was being perverted by Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi, and now they have taken a similar approach to a unit of the Department of Justice, the FBI. And this is a really incredible feat of reporting. Emily and Rachel talked to 45 people who work or have worked in the department recently, and many others, and what they found is chilling. So first of all, Emily, before you get to what you found, why did you decide you wanted to take a look at the FBI after you looked at the DOJ?
Yeah, so, we found that this way of telling the story of how things have changed in the government seemed pretty effective, that you can look back over the whole year, you can get people to narrate the kind of insider view they had of how things were transforming since Trump took office, and that it was a way of creating an arc of the whole year, because the news is obviously such a bombardment and it's overwhelming. And so, felt good about that format. And we didn't cover the FBI in the other story that we did because we were focused on career attorneys. And it just seemed like the FBI came up a lot. And obviously, there's a lot at stake. I mean, this is the most powerful law enforcement investigative agency in the country, probably in the world, has the power to not has the power, that's the wrong way to put it, has the job, the task of opening criminal investigations, and has this workforce of between 36 and 38,000 people who are longtime public servants, in a way that's kind of different from the lawyers. I mean, one thing I learned is that many, many people go into the FBI as agents or analysts, and they do at least 20 years. If you do your 20 years and you're over the age of 50 and you're an agent, you can retire, and then you can go on to more lucrative private sector work. But lots of people stay the course. It's like a life choice. And so the idea that so many people have left, have either retired or resigned or been fired or forced out since Trump took office, creates this pool of people with enormous experience and knowledge and expertise. And a lot of them were willing to talk, not about the classified things they did by any means, believe me. People were super careful about that. But they were very willing to talk about what they saw,
Did
what
you
they
ask
were
them
worried
about that?
About classified information.
Yeah. Or were you just like, no, we're not going to touch that. That's not really where we're going.
It's so clear that it's off the table. I mean, these people are incredibly well trained. And for most of the time, it just seemed like a miracle that they were talking to us at all, because that is not part of their job. I mean, some of them joked about how, in 30 years, they never got on the phone with a reporter, certainly without, authorization. It really rubs against the culture. So if I had tried to get any kind of state secrets, I feel like they would have all hung up on me. I think what surprised me the most was just how clear people's distress is about particular policy choices. So, for example, this push toward immigration enforcement, it has really changed the way FBI agents do their jobs and spend their time. And it means that they have been pulled off of investigating for counterterrorism or white collar crimes or public corruption, these tasks that have been the paramount priorities for the FBI forever. Kash Patel likes to talk a lot about how we're just letting cops be cops, but FBI agents do not consider themselves cops. And they don't mean that in like a snobby way. It's just that what they are trained for is dismantling large criminal organizations or running these much more complex kind of probes. And so to be told like your job is to go hang out in the Home Depot parking lot and back up ice, like that's not their value. And they were really clear about explaining that.
And I thought most particularly salient was when, with respect to cybercrime, the idea that cybercrime is some of the expertise that's been lost here, and that was the number one concern of Director Wray, who preceded Kash Patel, and he gave that famous statistic about China having was it something like 50 hackers in the state-run hacking operation to every one in the American defending against cyber hacking by the Chinese, and that was just China. So on the number one thing the previous guy thought was important is being decimated by this flip over to immigration, which was not a part of the FBI's duties before.
Yeah. Another thing that really jumped out at us is that, if you follow Kash Patel on X, what you'll see is constant posting about big increases they're claiming in year-to-year arrests or disrupting gangs. This is like enormous increases. And what our sources were telling us is that, so first of all, if you start putting all these agents out on the street and then you count all the arrests, like all the immigration arrests, like sure, your stats can go up. It's just kind of meaningless because it's not the kind of complex investigations that you were doing in the past. And then there also are these questions about whether they're just bilking their numbers by counting arrests and arrests that other agencies and the police are doing. The FBI, I should say, denied this, said this is not true, but our sources said, yeah, this is happening, and it helps explain these numbers.
I mean, Emily, just to devil's advocate here for a second, like I can imagine there's a very legitimate debate about whether the best way to keep Americans safe is to do lots of low-level busts or to spend huge amounts of resources going after criminal organizations. And the FBI has made a choice. Like that's the thing they focused on. That is where they've been. And now it sounds like they're doing it a lot less. But like what I didn't see in your piece is specific evidence right now that Americans are less safe than they were because of what the FBI is doing.
There's a lot of concern that behind the scenes that is the case or will be the case. And people talked about how over time Americans will be less safe because you're not laying the groundwork for these kinds of investigations. And if you don't staff them up and really pay attention and, man the wiretaps and develop all the human intel sources that allow us to prevent major attacks, that we will be less safe. But I mean, I agree with you. It's hard to measure, right? I mean, people said to us, like, it's hard to account for the things that are not happening and know exactly why the thing that we haven't done is going to lead to some attack in the future. And so that's like a leap you have to be able to make.
Well, but I think on the cyber case, when Wray went before Congress in January of 2024 and said, even if we shifted every single FBI agent and analyst to working on China cyber, we would be working with one person to 50 Chinese hackers. Like it was his number one concern. And that number one concern is being weakened by this. That seems to me to be a pretty clear indication of what the stakes are.
But there might be another point of view, which is like, yes, the threat of Chinese hacking is real. We're going to do a little bit less on that. But what's even more real is the threat of everyday gang violence towards Americans. Like I don't have a knowledge about it.
Choices,
but their policy choices.
Point.
It doesn't it seems to me that question seems to me in a way less important than what you found around the acts of vengeance and the kind of like the stripping of brain power from the organization seems much more important to me than we have made a set of different policy choices. Like that's
right, but I don't think you can find an analyst who says immigration is a greater national security strategic threat than China's cyber hacking.
I mean, it's all kind of part of the same picture, right? In that what is happening to the FBI, according to our sources, it's being turned into a weapon of the president's. And so the vengeance that you're talking about, David, is firing a stream of people who have worked on cases or did other things that Trump disfavors or that Kash Patel thinks that Trump disfavors. I mean, especially the agents who worked on the actual investigations of Trump. It doesn't matter how skilled they are or that they were assigned to those cases. They have just been trashed in the public arena, in part because a lot of documents are leaking or being sent over to Chuck Grassley, the senator, and he's been putting out unredacted information about people. There are stories in our piece about that. And in part because like everyone just assumes that these agents and these executives did things that now Trump is trying to rewrite history about, right? Like if you're trying to say that January 6th was this day of virtue and that all of the 3 criminal investigations of Trump that the FBI conducted were witch hunts, and that is the president's view, then these are the people who need to be punished. You have to demonize them. It doesn't matter that they were just like taking direction, doing what they were told to do, et cetera, et cetera. Today, right after we tape, Jack Smith, who was the special prosecutor in these investigations, is going to testify before Congress, and he's going to stand up for these cases and say that they were legitimate because of the president's conduct. Trump is going to hate that. And so, and one of the ways to think about this tale of vengeance that we were hearing and try to give people a chance to tell in our story is that it's all just part of, from the point of view of Trump and Patel, this is like a necessary way to change this whole narrative. You can't abide by the idea that these people are just continuing to do their jobs, and it's worth losing all the skill and knowledge and the way that is going to make America less safe potentially, or less able to combat public corruption, because they have to walk the gangplank in order for the president's version of the story to hold up.
And I think another thing that came out in this basket of using the FBI for the president's personal whims is the testimony you had from Jill Fields, who basically, Los Angeles, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Basically quit or was, forced to be fired or whatever because she said the FBI was being asked to actively go after protesters. And so in that case, it's not just rewriting January 6th, it's using the FBI in the way people have accused the president of using ICE as a basically domestic army to go after disfavored citizens.
Emily, one question I had is sort of as a boss and executive, it was really about Kash Patel. So
model.
As depicted, Kash Patel is self-absorbed, narcissistic, a social media obsessive, a negligent manager, inattentive to detail. If that is the case, then who is doing the work? Usually when you have a lazy narcissist at the top, you need like a very effective hatchet men to do the stuff. And one of the things that's characterized as actually the second Trump presidency is that the hatchet men are really quite good. Like when you have he has people who are good at managing government, the Russell Votes, the Stephen Miller, the Tom Homans, people who are very skilled at deploying the tools of government to do what they want. Is the FBI, I understand how the vengeance piece is undermining it, but are there people who are at the FBI who are effective at doing stuff, or are they just effective at destroying stuff?
I would add Brendan Carr at the FCC to that group.
Right. Great question. So Dan Bongino, the MAGA podcaster, was the deputy director. He has recently left. Andrew Bailey, who had been the attorney general in Missouri, was brought in to be the co-deputy director with Bongino, and he is viewed as like more of a real administrator. Then there is this group of people who've become the kind of second level executives on the 7th floor in the Hoover Building. That's where like the leadership sits. They talk about the 7th floor. That's a thing. And one thing that our sources were saying is that a lot of them are a few years away from retirement. So they can't just walk out the door without losing their pensions and their potential security clearances that help people get private sector work. And that makes them more likely to kind of go along and do the bidding of Patel and figure out how to implement these orders. So yeah, I think there is this layer of people serving as like hatchet men, firing people and just figuring out how to implement orders. And look, this is a government agency that, functions in a lot of ways with a sort of military type chain of command. So if you're an analyst and you're told like, now you have to start looking up lots of information about undocumented immigrants on behalf of ICE, like that's what you're going to turn to doing. You don't get to be like, I don't want to do that unless you're just going to walk out the door.
Emily, quick question on this, on the stakes here. One of the areas where the FBI isn't paying as much attention as they used to was in drug trafficking and transnational organized crime. That seems confusing, given that the president is ordering the ships from Venezuela blown up in the seas. Is there a big hole on the drug trafficking front, or is that just one of the many things, along with cyber and terrorism and white collar crime and public corruption, that has languished with the new attentions?
I mean, I think what our sources would say is that anything that is a complex investigation that is not just like quick street level arrests in which you can kind of jack up the numbers is at risk right now. And so, yeah, they're also not necessarily doing as much of that kind of laying the groundwork of really going after cartels, whether or not that is in line with, blowing up boats in Venezuela. Like, it's not as if these parts of the federal government are working in sync with each other.
And another thing that confused me a little bit was one of your sources saying that basically the FBI was working on the fraud investigation involving the Somali-run autism centers, and that they had to suspend that investigation for weeks because they got pulled into immigration operations.
One of our sources did say that. Yeah, there are kind of some amazing examples of investigations being dropped. Another one into neo-Nazis. Like, people were frustrated because they felt like they had...
That is not surprising. That one was not a shock. I mean...
Let 1,000 neo-Nazis bloom. But the Somali-run autism centers did seem like it was at odds with the administration's claims about, all of the fraud in Minnesota and their priorities. But, whatever. That's, again, just a little inconsistency.
There was a Washington Post reporter whose home was raided the other day by the FBI, or maybe it was by seeking information about sources who may have given her classified, or that source may have, taken information they weren't allowed to take. And so they raided this Post reporter home to see what she had, which is really, if not unprecedented, it's extremely unusual. I wonder if you are worried about any risks that you've taken or any risks to your sources, and what you're doing to safeguard against that.
Yeah, so this is Hannah Nathanson at the Washington Post, and there was a search warrant executed at her home in an Espionage Act case that is targeting one of her sources who may have classified information. It's not going after Hannah exactly, but it was very chilling to hear about it while we were doing our reporting. I mean, like I said, we have no classified information whatsoever. However, knowing that the government is taking this kind of aggressive step does make you think a lot about protecting your sources, not because they have done anything wrong, but because it just feels like, to a certain degree, all bets are off in this administration. And so, I've thought a lot about how to try to make sure that the sources will be protected. And one kind of remarkable thing about this story is that there are 16 people who have all left the FBI in the last year who are talking on the record in the piece. We have these kind of amazing, badass photos of a lot of them. And that in itself is a sign of internal breakdown, because it goes so against the culture of the FBI for people to be speaking out like this. So, that's an act of bravery on their part. There are other people in the story who are unnamed. And lots of people we talked to who are not quoted in the story.
Emily Bazelon and Rachel Poser's piece, "A Year Inside Kash Patel's FBI," is up on the New York Times, and it's amazing. Congratulations, Emily.
Thank you.
You've really found a niche as this oral history, like the stuff you did on Israel-Palestine, now DOJ, FBI. I feel like this is maybe your métier.
Maybe it is. I love that people just get to talk in this unmediated way. I really love that. They get to just have their voices in the story without so much of me.
It is mediated because you then edit it.
It's true.
and put your own comments in between. So just by the way.
It's maybe less mediated, but you're totally right to point that out. Yes.
I was interested, though not surprised, but that all of the responses you got, both specifically from Bongino and also then just more broadly from the administration, was like not even to wrestle with any of the claims, really, even in their lightest form, which is basically just to like either assert the opposite or attacked the Times.
Good that you pointed that out. Good to get that comment in there. Yes, they did.
Let us go to cocktail chatter. I imagine that young Ms. Bazelon will be really having herself a celebratory drink to congratulate herself on hard work well done. What will you be chattering about as you do that, Emily?
I watched the movie Sentimental Value over the weekend. Have you guys seen this Danish film yet? I just thought it was so moving and wonderful. I'm one of many people who is taken with the work of this director, Joachim Trier, maybe is how you pronounce his name. I really thought about it a lot. And then I kind of went down a rabbit hole a little bit, as like, this is my favorite thing of late, that you have one cultural a book or a movie, and then you can listen to podcasts about it and you can read articles. And so I really recommend Margaret Talbot's profile in the New Yorker of Trier, which I thought was great. And then I listened to a BBC documentary that was about the making of the movie, and it was super process oriented in a way that was very satisfying to listen to, having loved the movie. My favorite detail from the podcast is that so Elle Fanning is a character in the movie. She's playing basically a movie actress like Elle Fanning, a kind of famous person who's brought in to be cast in a movie. And she's lovely in the movie. So they didn't know that she was going to accept this role, or that someone like her would accept the role, until they were like 2 months away from production. And the producer who's talking about this in the documentary is talking about it in real time before they have for sure signed her. And she's like cool as a cucumber about it. And it's this really nice detail where the BBC interviewer is like, really? You're not worried about this? And they're like, oh, it's going to be fine. And then indeed it was fine.
John Dickerson.
I have more than one chatter. I have no idea how many I'll do, but one is that a letter is being auctioned off of Jimmy Carter's, and it is a note to his wife, Rosalind Carter, in 1978 on the 18th of August, which was her birthday. And it says to Rosalind, "It's nice to be growing old together with you." And he signs it ILYTG, Jimmy. And then he says, P.S. Happy birthday. The ILYTG is I love you the goodest, which is an expression his parents used to trade back and forth, and that apparently is like a Carter family like inside joke. Anyway, but it looks very odd on the page, ILYTG, but that was their little, so I thought that was like a little charming little thing. The other thing is there's something that I think is a shift in the way the president lies, which struck me in his Davos press conference, which was really rambling. He said that China had no wind farms, and he said that he hadn't been able to find any wind farms in China. China has one of the largest wind farms on the planet, so large that it can literally be seen from space. Its wind energy sector is the largest in the world by every metric. So why do I bring this up? It's not just a normal lie, right? But it's got this second piece where he says that we've been able to find, which sort of nods to the norm that you're supposed to go check stuff out when you say crazy things. So he's saying basically they have no wind farms, and we've looked at it because we've tried to find it and they don't have them. So it's like a compounded lie. And he did this also with the case of Renee Good. He said that she didn't just, talking about the ICE agent, she didn't just try to run him over. She ran him over, which is, again, an effort to say, like, no, I looked into it. I know you might be skeptical. She didn't just try to run him over. She ran him over, which is interesting because it nods to the idea that when you lie or you say something extravagant, like, you have an obligation to kind of figure out if it's actually true. But that pantomime is really in the effort of just compounding the lie. So that interested me.
Read it on Substack. Speaking of which, I want to recommend to everyone that you look at Matt Iglesias's slow, boring series on liberalism. So I talk about Matt a lot. Like, I admire him. He used to work with us, and I just think I think the world of him as a writer and a thinker. And he, has this wonderful Substack where he talks about all sorts of things, but he's going deep on liberalism, which is maybe the most unfashionable ideology of the moment. And he has a piece this week, Liberalism and the Search for Meaning, the worst option except for all of the others. And I'm not going to summarize it because it's complicated, but it's basically a really compelling reminder of why liberalism protects free society. And in fact, the people it protects most of all are in some ways people who don't even want a free society, or people who belong to particularly religious minorities. And that anti-liberals of both on the left and right will really miss it if we let it wither. It's not democracy that really is the thing that protects us. It is it is liberalism that protects us. And Matt explains that quite beautifully. So I would recommend that.
And that will prepare you for the publication in April of The Revolutionary Center, The Lost Genius of Liberalism by GabFest occasional participant Adrian Wooldridge. I was
going to describe myself as a radical centrist as I was speaking about this, and I was like, I'm not really a radical centrist, but I am a centrist. The other quick chatter, I've just listed a couple more of my Fort tours in Washington D.C. This coming up this fall. I just listed a couple new ones, but you can get them tickets at secretfortdc.com. So those tickets usually go pretty quickly. So if you want to get them, Secret Fort DC, I think I listed something in October and something in November. Listeners, you have given us great chatters. Please keep them coming by emailing us at gabfest@slate.com. I so enjoy reading through your listener chatter submissions. And I'm really excited to hear from Brad Hudson.
Hey Gabfest, this is Brad Hudson in Ventura, California, a day one listener to the show. For my chatter, I want to share a delightfully terrifying story by Joanna Stern at the Wall Street Journal titled, "We Let AI Run Our Office Vending Machine. It Lost Hundreds of Dollars." The article and accompanying video tell the story of what happens when you hand over your office vending machine operations to AI and say, have at it. Spoiler alert, it didn't just get the snacks wrong. It gave away a free PlayStation, ordered a live fish, and ultimately lost hundreds of dollars in profit. It's a tech experiment that feels like letting a toddler run a corner store with access to a credit card, a Slack channel, and zero impulse control. Give it a read, or better yet, watch the video as Joanna breaks down the chaotic brilliance of letting AI call the shots in a real-world vending machine. I don't know if the story made me more or less concerned about AI and its future impact on civilization, but I'm definitely down for some free swag from Claudius in the meantime. Cheers.
Oh my God, I loved that story. It is so funny.
One of the most haunting videos, because it is so funny, that I've ever seen is a video called Robot Flipping Pancakes that I think about a lot. I'm sure I've talked about it on the GabFest before. And what it is, it's a robot that's learning how to flip pancakes. And so it has a pan and it's flipping a wooden pancake and trying to catch it on the other side. And when it starts, it's just like, it is so disorganized. It is hurling the pancake 50 feet in the wrong direction. It hits itself with the pancake. It just it doesn't flip it at all. And so it's just hilarious to watch it. And then you see it at try 150 and it's just doing perfect flip. And you're like, oh shit, that was funny. It was funny when it couldn't do it, not so funny when it can do it. And that's how I feel about the funny ha ha ha, the AI messed up the vending machine. Wait till you see they're going to be selling live kidneys in vending machines soon.
Oh my God.
They're doing terrible things in vending machines. Anyway, we're not the only podcast to listen to at Slate this week. Death, Sex, and Money, great podcast, has Jonathan Goldstein, the host of Heavyweight, on to talk about Heavyweight Second Chance, and to share an episode of Heavyweight, the season finale, Deborah, about a 101-year-old woman who discovered a box she had stashed away many, many, many years before. Anyway, love Death, Sex, and Money, and love Heavyweight.
Love Heavyweight.
So that's all for our episode this week. We also have a bonus episode in your feed. We're going to talk about Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro and his new memoir. That is for Slate Plus members only. You can become a Slate Plus member by going to the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. You, of course, get lots of bonus episodes of Slate podcasts. You never hit the paywall on the Slate site, et cetera, et cetera. So join. That is our show for today. The Political Gabfest is produced by Nina Porzucki. Our researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. Mila Bell is Executive Producer for Slate Podcasts. And Hillary Fry is the EIC, Editor-in-Chief of Slate. For Emily, Bazelon, and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. We'll talk to you next week.